They always told you emotions are what make you human, that listening to your heart would lead you to truth, that expressing what you feel is a form of strength. But somewhere along the way, you started noticing something else. Every time you opened up, someone found a way to use it. Every time you reacted fast, they knew how to make you lose faster. Niccolò Machiavelli figured that out centuries before you did. While everyone else clung to the idea that feelings were sacred, he discovered a brutal truth. The more you feel, the easier you are to control. You've probably felt this before. You love someone a little too openly and they start pulling away. You forgive someone too quickly and they take it as a cue to repeat the offense. You cry, explain, overexpress, and later realize it was all used against you. Machiavelli wasn't heartless, but he understood that in the real world, especially one filled with betrayal and power plays, emotions weren't just liabilities, they were weapons. Not the kind you use, but the kind others use on you. That's why Machiavelli didn't just write about strategy. He lived it. Not just in war rooms and political circles, but within himself. Because what good is mastering power dynamics if someone can yank your emotions like a string and unravel everything you built? He trained himself to be emotionally untouchable. Not cold, not numb, but self-contained, and that's very different. You've been taught that vulnerability equals courage, that being emotional is being honest. And yes, sometimes that's true. But if you've ever poured your heart out and been ignored, mocked, or manipulated afterward, then you know that feelings, when untrained, don't always set you free. Sometimes they put the lock on your own cage and hand others the key. Imagine walking into a room and knowing that no one can provoke you, no one can fluster you, and no one can read you. That's the kind of power Machiavelli was after, and it's the kind of power you can build. This isn't about being stoic for appearances. It's about becoming strategic from the inside out. Machiavelli once said, men are driven by two main forces, love and fear. But only one of them can be fully controlled. To be feared, he understood you must learn to feel less, or at least stop letting others know what you feel. Your anger makes you easy to provoke. Your desire for connection makes you chase validation. Your fear makes you predictable. And predictability, that's death in any strategic game. So how do you become what Machiavelli became, someone who can feel deeply but act with cold clarity? It starts with recognizing what's been happening all along. Think back. How many times have your emotions caused you to misjudge someone, to trust too early, to share too much, to react too quickly? They didn't even have to be clever. They just had to pull the right emotional lever. And that's the first shift, realizing emotions aren't bad, they're just data. But when you let them steer the ship, you hand over the wheel to anyone who knows where your buttons are. The most dangerous people in history weren't loud. They weren't emotionally chaotic. They were quiet, unbothered, unshakable. Not because they didn't care, but because they didn't allow what they cared about to become ammunition. That's what Machiavelli trained for. Not to be hollow, but to be immune. He wasn't born like this. He didn't just wake up one day with emotional armor. He was betrayed, used, thrown out, humiliated, erased. He gave loyalty to the wrong people and paid for it with exile, imprisonment, and abandonment. And in that fire, he forged his detachment. Not because he didn't want to feel, but because feeling unchecked had almost destroyed him. When he wrote The Prince, it wasn't revenge, it was clarity. It was him saying, let me show you how power actually works, without the fairy tale filter. Now here you are, trying to build a life, maybe a business, a legacy, maybe just peace. And every time you get emotional, someone else gets stronger. You've tried being open. You've tried explaining, you've tried crying it out, journaling it out, talking it out. But the moment your feelings leave your body and enter someone else's awareness, they become leverage. Machiavelli knew this. That's why he trained differently. So how do you train for it? Start where he did. Not with theory, with pain. Go back to the moments you were betrayed, lied to, left behind, mocked, ghosted. Ask yourself, what did I feel? Shame, rage, grief. That pain you felt, that wasn't just suffering, that was information. Information about who to trust, about what triggers you, about how your emotions expose your blind spots. You can't numb it, but you can study it. Every betrayal is a lesson. Every time someone used your feelings against you, it was a map to yourself. And once you learn to read that map, you stop falling into the same emotional traps. You stop oversharing with people who haven't earned your truth. You stop reacting when silence is the most powerful move in the room. You stop expecting emotional loyalty from people who can't even be loyal to their own values. Machiavelli didn't isolate himself to protect his heart. He surrounded himself with power, deceit, and politics, and practiced staying calm in the storm. You can do the same. Life will test you. Relationships will push your buttons. Social media will bait you. Family will guilt you. Work will challenge your ego. And in all of it, your ability to remain composed, to feel but not flinch, will decide your strength. Let others react. Let them expose themselves. You train for silence. You become the mirror that reflects, not the glass that shatters. Machiavelli's transformation didn't begin with rage. It began with realization. That moment when the illusion fades and all that's left is truth, cold, unsentimental, unfiltered. You've probably had one of those moments. When the person you defended doesn't defend you. When the ones you showed up for suddenly disappear. When someone you trusted uses your words against you. And in that moment, something inside you shifts. You stop thinking, how could they? And you start thinking, of course they did. That's not bitterness, that's clarity. Machiavelli realized that trust when built on emotion is a trap. People are loyal only as long as loyalty costs them nothing. The moment there's risk, discomfort, or sacrifice, they flip. Not because they're evil, but because they're human. And Machiavelli stopped expecting anything more than that. He wasn't surprised when loyalty faded. He expected it. And because of that, he couldn't be blindsided anymore. So many people chase closure after betrayal. They want an apology, an explanation, a reason. But Machiavelli didn't chase. He didn't collapse. He didn't beg. He stepped back and watched the game for what it was. And that step back, that pause, is what made him powerful. If someone betrays you and you scream, they feel justified. If you beg, they feel superior. If you explain, they feel in control. But if you say nothing, if you just go quiet, they're left in the tension, and people hate that. Because silence feels like judgment. It feels like power. It feels like you know something they don't. That's what Machiavelli mastered: emotional restraint as a form of authority. You've seen it in your own life. The person who speaks the loudest in an argument usually feels the most threatened. The one who needs to explain everything, who interrupts, who raises their voice. They're leaking control. But the one who pauses, who waits, who speaks only when they choose, that's the person everyone watches. Not because they're louder, but because their silence carries weight. You can develop that presence, not by suppressing how you feel, but by choosing when and how to express it. There's a difference between emotional control and emotional suppression. Suppression is pretending. It's avoidance. It's shoving feelings into a box until they leak out sideways. Control, on the other hand, is precision. It's feeling fully, but not performing that feeling for others to consume. You can feel grief and still speak with calm. You can feel rage and still hold your ground without lashing out. You can feel love, deep burning love, and still not reveal it until it serves you to do so. That's not being fake. That's being sovereign. Machiavelli trained for that. He studied pain like a scientist. He dissected betrayal like a strategist. And in that study, he rewired his instincts. He stopped reacting to kindness as trustworthiness. He stopped mistaking smiles for safety. He learned to see through charm, praise, and approval, not with cynicism, but with clarity. Someone praises you too quickly, he felt caution, not comfort. Someone agrees too eagerly, he watched for the angle. Not because he was paranoid, but because he refused to be fooled by surface signals. And that's the mindset shift you start to build when you stop letting your emotions lead the way. You don't become numb, you become accurate. This world rewards those who can stay calm, while others leak chaos. Think of any high-stakes situation, negotiations, arguments, family tension, romantic conflict. The person who stays composed becomes the anchor. Everyone else orbits around them. But how do you become that anchor? You train in discomfort. You don't build emotional stillness by meditating on a beach. You build it in the awkward silences, in the moments where someone accuses you and you don't flinch, where someone pushes your guilt buttons and you don't rise to defend yourself, where someone tries to bait you and you just sit calm, steady, undisturbed. You're not ignoring the emotion, you're feeling it fully, privately. That's the discipline Machiavelli built: the pause. The pause is your weapon. It's the space between someone pushing you and you pushing back. It's the moment where you choose not to respond, not because you're passive, but because you're reading the field. Every second you stay calm while someone else spirals, you gain information. You see what matters to them. You see where they're insecure. You see what they're trying to control. Most people show their entire emotional blueprint the moment they try to manipulate you. If they guilt you, they're insecure. If they flatter you, they want something. If they ignore you, they're desperate for attention. And if you're too reactive, you miss it all because you're too busy playing the part they rehearsed for you. But Machiavelli, he didn't rehearse reactions. He trained for ambiguity. If someone asked him, "Are you okay?" he'd say, "I'm processing." If someone said, "What are you thinking?" he'd say a lot, but nothing urgent. Because the less you reveal, the more they guess. And guesswork is exhausting. People give up control when they can't read you. Emotional ambiguity isn't being evasive. It's being protective. You're not hiding from people. You're filtering who gets access to the real you. Think of it like emotional encryption. You still feel, you still care, you still think deeply, but not everyone gets the password. You don't argue to be understood anymore. You don't respond just to defend your name. You don't chase people to prove your worth. Instead, you do what Machiavelli did: you vanish. You disengage from the drama. You leave the conversation, not with a slam of the door, but with a quiet step away. Power doesn't need a closing argument. It just needs to disappear. And when you do that enough, when you stop over-explaining, over-justifying, over-feeling out loud, something incredible happens. People stop trying to push your buttons because they finally realize they don't work anymore. You'll start to notice something else too. Drama doesn't stick to you like it used to. The people who once fed off your emotional reactions stop coming around, not because they've changed, but because you have. They realize there's nothing to feed on anymore. No energy to pull, no reaction to harvest. You've become in their world boring, but in truth, you've become sovereign. Machiavelli understood this better than most. In the courts of Florence, emotions were currency. Loyalty was transactional. Smiles were masks. Every conversation was a performance. And in that world, the loudest man in the room was rarely the one in power. The one who said the least, who gave away nothing, was the one who left others second-guessing themselves. That's the real currency of control: uncertainty. Let's look at a group dynamic. There's always someone who needs to speak first, to be seen, to be heard, to prove something. There's someone who interrupts, afraid of being forgotten. Someone who over-explains, unsure if they're making sense. Someone who keeps talking, hoping their words will be enough to justify their presence. But then there's the one who waits. They don't rush. They don't chase the spotlight. They don't jump to fill silences. They just wait. And when they finally speak, everyone listens. Not because they're louder, but because they've made silence their leverage. That is Machiavellian presence. It's not about having no feelings. It's about not handing those feelings over like free samples. It's not about faking confidence. It's about anchoring yourself in such a way that others orbit you, unsure why they're drawn in, but aware that they are. Self-control becomes a mirror. If you stay calm, they start questioning themselves. If you don't flinch, they wonder if they crossed a line. If you don't chase closure, they spiral, trying to figure out what happened. That's the kind of power Machiavelli trained for. He knew silence is rarely empty, it's loaded. It's pressure, it's projection. When you say less, people start revealing more. They talk to fill the space. They confess things you never asked. They overshare because your stillness feels like judgment. And the best part, you said nothing. You let them read themselves out loud. That's why when you stop reacting the way they expect, you break their pattern. They insult you, you stay still. They ghost you, you don't chase. They demand you explain yourself, you don't take the bait. Suddenly, they're unsure of your next move. And that's when you gain control of the board. Machiavelli knew once you introduce uncertainty, you break their grip on you. You're no longer the player in their game. You're the architect of a new game altogether. Let's be clear though, detachment isn't apathy. You're not dead inside. You still care, you still love, you still want connection, you just don't outsource your identity to those things anymore. You don't give people access to your emotional dashboard. You don't let someone's tone shift dictate your mood. You don't allow guilt-tripping love bombing or ghosting to send you spiraling. Now only you know what's happening inside. Everyone else, they guess. And guesswork creates fear, especially in people who are used to pulling emotional strings. Ever notice how the quietest person in a room is often the most respected? It's not always charisma. Sometimes it's just emotional control expressed physically. The way they speak slowly, the way they make eye contact without flinching, the way they sit still while others fidget and adjust. These small signals tell the room, I am not here to impress. I am here to observe. That's not arrogance, that's training. Machiavelli didn't reach this state by hiding from conflict. He didn't sit on a mountain meditating on detachment. He learned in real time through betrayal, manipulation, and power struggles. Emotional strength isn't built in moments of peace. It's forged in chaos. And that's where your training happens too. When someone insults you and you pause. When someone tries to provoke you with shame and you pause. When someone accuses you, cries, begs, guilt trips, and you pause. Not because you're bottling anything, but because you're choosing your response instead of letting it choose you. That's emotional martial arts. Using their energy against them. Staying grounded while others scramble. And the more you train that pause, the more power you gather. Because in that pause, you don't just control your words. You control the tempo of the room. You decide the rhythm. And when you set the rhythm, you set the outcome. He who speaks first may seem confident, but he who waits sees the full terrain. And the advantage always belongs to the one who understands the battlefield. Let them burn energy trying to provoke you. Let them spend emotions recklessly. You conserve yours. That makes you more dangerous than any comeback ever could. You don't react to every insult. You don't personalize every slight. You don't melt at every sign of rejection. Instead, you study. You watch. You catalog their behavior not to punish them, but to understand them. Because people show their truest self in how they try to control yours. If they guilt you, they're trying to get something without asking. If they flatter you, they want influence over you. If they ignore you, they're hoping you'll chase and validate them. Machiavelli treated emotion like intel. Each reaction from another person was a map, and each map a tactical edge. But only if you're quiet enough to read it. You don't owe anyone emotional transparency. If they ask, are you mad? You say, I'm reflecting. If they ask, what are you feeling? You say, I'm thinking it through. Not because you're hiding, but because you're choosing who gets to know you. Not everyone deserves front row access to your emotional process. Because here's the truth, when you give people too much clarity, they gain too much control. But when you master ambiguity, you gain protection. And that's not avoidance, that's strategy. The more unpredictable you become, the less they can plan around you. And in a world built on emotional routines, being unreadable is power. You've probably noticed it already, the shift. The conversations where you used to feel the need to explain yourself now feel unnecessary. The silences that once made you uncomfortable now feel like space you own. That right there is emotional immunity. Not numbness, not bitterness, just clarity wrapped in stillness. Machiavelli didn't explain himself to win arguments. He didn't fight lies with louder truths. He didn't rush into drama to protect his reputation. Instead, he flooded every lie with results. He outperformed, he outlasted, he outgrew. And that's what you start to realize once emotional control becomes second nature. Proof becomes louder than explanation. You don't defend yourself, you demonstrate. You don't react to rumors, you build something they can't ignore. You don't try to be liked, you become undeniable. And over time, people stop trying to get under your skin because they realize your skin is no longer a door. It's a wall they can't scale. Machiavelli would walk through chaos with unshaken eyes, not because he didn't feel anything, but because he knew how to feel nothing when it didn't serve him. That's where your training is headed to. The more you grow, the more you'll recognize the game not to win it in the traditional sense, but to stop playing on anyone else's terms. So how do you apply this in the real world? You'll be tested in person and online. You'll get messages designed to trigger you. People will bait you with passive-aggressive comments, emotional threats, indirect jabs. They want to see if you'll take the bait. Machiavelli's move. Do nothing. Just look. Just wait. Let silence grow, because silence has gravity. And if you have to respond, say interesting point. Or if that's how you see it, or I'll think about that. Not sarcastic, not cold, just distant, untouchable. What happens next is predictable. They leave confused, off balance, because they expected a scene and got a void. They rehearsed your meltdown and got a shrug. It works in close relationships too. A partner, friend, or family member says, "You used to be more vulnerable. Why don't you open up anymore?" What they're really saying is, "I don't know how to control you anymore, and that scares me." Machiavelli wouldn't panic. He wouldn't rush to prove his love or kindness. He wouldn't get loud to be heard. He'd stay composed and respond when the pattern, not the pressure, called for it. You're not obligated to reveal yourself just because someone demands it, especially when that demand is emotionally loaded. If someone repeatedly uses guilt, silence, or chaos to manipulate your openness, you don't owe them vulnerability. You owe them distance. Stillness teaches people how to treat you, not with words, but with boundaries. The kind of boundaries that aren't announced, just enforced, quietly, repeatedly. Your emotional presence becomes a standard, and the people who don't respect that standard simply don't last. You'll see it happen. Your name will come up in rooms you're not in. People will doubt you, misinterpret you, project onto you, and your instinct will be to jump in to clarify, correct, clear the air. But Machiavelli wouldn't. He knew better. He knew that the moment you start chasing clarity, you start handing out pieces of your power. He wouldn't argue with rumor. He'd outrun it. He wouldn't defend against gossip. He'd dominate the room until gossip looked petty. He wouldn't explain his silence. He'd let it speak for itself. And over time, people learn not to cross you out of fear, but to respect you out of uncertainty. Because they can't quite place you, can't decode you, can't predict you, and that mystery makes them careful. It's not about becoming an emotionless machine. It's about becoming a strategic human being. Someone who feels everything but chooses which feelings get airtime. Someone who knows how to cry in private and walk into the world with unshaken hands. Someone who stops bleeding in public just to prove they're wounded. You don't chase anymore. You attract. You don't overcorrect to avoid being misunderstood. You accept that silence can speak for you. You say fewer words, but each one lands like a sentence. Why? Because your language is no longer shaped by the need to be validated. It's sharpened by the discipline of emotional clarity. You don't talk to be heard. You speak when the moment requires weight. And that makes people stop scrolling, stop talking, stop fidgeting, because your stillness demands attention. Before, it took you months to recognize red flags. Now you see them in a single conversation, one manipulative guilt trip, and you're done. One passive-aggressive test, and you're out. Not in anger, just in understanding. Because emotional clarity removes illusions. You stop projecting your hope onto people. You stop imagining potential where there's only chaos. You stop creating reasons to keep people who don't respect your peace. You just see, and what you see you act on. Not later, not after 10 signs, just once. That's enough. And the situations that used to undo you, they start to feel like reruns. That same old emotional trick, seen it. The fake apology followed by blame shifting already decoded it. The sudden silence after an argument, not even a ripple anymore. You've trained in the emotional battlefield long enough to know every scene before the actor shows up. And so you don't react. You redirect. You go from being the target, the one who gets hit, to being the force others adjust to. You're no longer reactive. You're elemental. Still, quiet, clear. And even when people can't explain it, they feel it. They treat you differently. They respect your space without you asking. They hesitate before testing your limits, because something in you doesn't bend anymore. There comes a moment where it's not an act. You don't have to rehearse the pause. You are the pause. You don't have to suppress the emotion. You've taught it to obey. And that right there is Machiavelli's final form. Not untouchable because he stopped feeling. Untouchable because he taught himself to choose when to feel. This is the state most people never reach. Not because it's out of reach, but because they never stop letting the world train them how to feel. You've reversed that flow. You're no longer absorbing emotion like a sponge. You're selecting, filtering, commanding what comes in, and more importantly, what comes out. You are no longer the emotional soldier, wounded and reactive, chasing closure, proving your worth. You've become the strategist, the one who listens without speaking, the one who moves without warning, the one who disappears without explanation, the one who leads without ever raising their voice. You don't ask anymore, "What should I say?" Now you ask, "What outcome do I want?" And then you decide stillness, silence, or strike. Strategically, not emotionally. Because emotional people are easy to consume. They confess too early, apologize too fast, beg to be seen, burn themselves out just to keep someone else warm. You've done that. You remember how much it cost. But now you hold your own feelings like a fortress. You don't lock them away. You reinforce them. No one gets in unless they've earned the key. And when you become the unreadable, untouchable, unshakable one, you become unforgettable. You're no longer a character in their drama. You're the mystery that haunts them. Not because you tried to be powerful, but because you finally stopped bleeding for an audience. This is not about being cold. This is about evolution. You've evolved beyond guilt, beyond begging, beyond the need to be understood by people who weaponize your openness. You don't reject emotion. You master it. You command it. You store it like a warrior stores their blade, drawn only when necessary and never wasted on noise. Machiavelli wouldn't tell you don't feel. He'd tell you don't show your feelings unless it strengthens your position. That's the final rule. Not emotional suppression, but emotional precision. Because the real power, it's not in being unfeeling. It's in being indecipherable. No one can destroy what they cannot define. No one can manipulate what they cannot read. And no one can break what does not flinch. You don't explain your piece. You don't defend your standards. You don't ask permission for your silence. You move when it's time, speak when it matters, disappear without drama, return without apology. You've become that rare presence, calm, commanding, self-contained. And when they finally ask, how did you become like this, you won't say a word. Maybe you'll just smile. Because the truth is too long for a sentence and too sharp for someone who hasn't lived it. But if you did answer, you'd say this: I stopped letting the world teach me how to feel, and started teaching myself when to feel. Because in a world of overreaction, emotional mastery isn't just a skill, it's a shield. And once you carry that shield, the chaos stops reaching you. You've become still, not because you're empty, but because you're full of choices. Quiet, not because you have nothing to say, but because you're no longer wasting breath on things that don't deserve it. You've stepped off the stage, you've stopped performing. And now you walk the earth the way Machiavelli would: precise, intentional, unfazed. You lead not by force, but by presence. You influence not by words, but by control. And you win not through domination, but through detachment. This is your final form, and they'll feel it before they understand it.